Hey, how you going? I welcome you to the first episode in my Analog Adventures series, where we'll be taking a look at all things film photography. In this series, I'm also assuming that you have some prior knowledge of the exposure triangle. If not, then here's a really good video explaining it all. So for a bit of background, when I was around 16, I started to really get into photography, and more specifically film photography, and it's been an on and off passion for the past 14 years. But I've always been into the more experimental side of film photography, from flipping around colour rolls and making red scale, to developing film in coffee, cross-processing slide film in colour negative chemicals, and all other manners of crazy things. So on that note, I thought in this first episode we might experiment with some of this really low ISO Kodak Ektachrome slide duplicating film, which I'll cross-process in C41 colour negative chemicals to see what kind of crazy colours we end up with. So what exactly was the purpose of this film? So back in the 60s and 70s, when people used to get photos developed, it used to be quite expensive to actually get colour prints made. So instead, people would choose to shoot on positive film and then have them made up into proper slides. That way, when people wanted to show off their holiday photos, they could use a slide projector rather than passing around a stack of photos. But obviously that changed over time as colour prints became cheaper to get made. But the problem with having a slide is that you only had the one copy. So if you wanted to have multiple made up, you basically had to photograph the slide back onto more film. But the problem was that creating an exact copy was quite difficult, as often the duplicate would have way more contrast compared to the original. So that's where some of this slide duplication film came in, where it was designed to have minimal grain and contrast, specifically for the purpose of duplicating slides, using all the special equipment. Plus it's also tungsten balanced, as the duplication process was usually done using a blue tinted lamp. Now I don't particularly fancy buying a heap of expensive slide duplicating equipment, but I would like to put a roll of this through my Pentax Spotmatic and see what kind of results we get from cross-processing the film. Now this film is rated at 32 ISO, but it did also expire in 1991, which is 33 years ago. The general wisdom for expired colour negative film is to halve the ISO for every decade past expiry, also known as overexposing by one stop. Now a lot of people say that you can't actually do this for slide film and to just shoot it at box speed, but I think most of the time they're usually referring to very fresh slide film, not something that expired in the early 90s. So I think in this case, it'd be best to still try and overexpose our photos, just to try and minimise any grain that has built up over the years of expiry. And given it's about 3 decades old, that means overexposing by 3 stops, which is equal to around 4 ISO, which is super slow. So that means exposures from several seconds up to minutes, depending on our lens aperture. So I also thought, what better place to shoot slow film where we need minutes long exposures and at the beach, where there's lots of movement from the water to create a kind of dreamy landscape feeling. So let's go jump in the car and drive to the beach and see what kind of crazy photos we can get with this film. So I'm down here along the south coast of Gippsland at a little place called Cape Patterson. Around here there's quite a few nice beaches for swimming in the summer, but this particular one has some really nice rock pools to be able to take our dreamy landscape photos today. Now I know I said that we were going to shoot the film at 4 ISO, but having a better think about it, I think it would be better to actually do some bracketing shots, as I actually have no real way of knowing just how the film's going to respond after 30 years of expiry. So I'll take a series of photos between 32 to 4 ISO, just so I know how the film will respond for next time. So let's get the roller film loaded into the camera and start shooting our photos. So I've set the camera lens aperture to f22 just to be able to try and get the longest exposures we possibly can. And the little light meter app is telling me that at 32 ISO, to expose to the shadows I need an exposure of 6 seconds. So for each subsequent exposure below 32, I just need to double the exposure time. Hey, done. So the roll of film is all finished. So let's get it rewound and sent off to the lab and see what results we've gotten. So it's a few weeks later, and I've finally gotten the photos back, and they turned out completely unexpected in both a good and a bad way. When I first got the scans back, they were completely washed out with very little detail to be seen. So I did a bit of level adjusting in GIMP to try and maximise the contrast and try and bring out as much detail as possible. And comparing the difference between the 4 exposures of each scene, we can see that a little bit more detail can be seen in the shadows of the rocks as the exposure time increased, as well as the blue colour cast from the tungsten film becoming a lot more prominent. They also came out pretty grainy, but given how old the film is, that's not entirely unexpected. But overall, I think there's quite a few nice ones that I got from the whole roll. The movement of the water being completely blurred into a misty fog, as well as the blue colour cast, makes the entire scene look completely alien, as if they were the first photos we had gotten back from some far distant planet. I also wanted to find out some more information about the film to make it so completely washed out. So I sent an email to the lab asking a few questions, and they replied back with a photo of the negatives compared to some fresh ones. And we can see just how thin and clear the negatives are, so I'm not completely shocked that the scanner struggled to make a well-balanced image. So I think for next time, I might need to try and overexpose the film even further, and maybe 2 ISO or even lower, just to try and bring out as much detail as possible. And given that I've got 2 more rolls of this stuff, plus an entire 30-meter roll, there's plenty of room for experimenting and seeing what kind of results I get. So that's it for our first Analog Adventures episode. So until next time, see you later.